Welcome to the Green Lectionary Podcast, a production of Creation Justice Ministries. The Green Lectionary is a conversation on Scripture through the lens of creation justice. My name is Derrick Weston, and today we'll be doing a bonus episode to celebrate Ocean Month. Join us as we look at Job 38 through the lens of creation justice.
Let the songs of the water, land, and sky resound, 'cause together we're all bound. Within these pages, there's always new life to be found.
Okay, our text comes from Job, chapter 38, verses 1 through 11. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy, or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed bonds for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come, and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stopped. So, where is creation in this passage?
So this passage, it's so interesting to me because all of it is creation. It's about the creator asking one of their creation, Job, and talking about what was created. And so creation is this is in essence, a creation narrative, a very poetic creation narrative that's happening. And that's where creation is. But I love it as there's almost a bit of an attitude that I read with it when I'm reading this passage. And I appreciate it to kind of hear that voice when it comes to creation and just the friendly reminder of not only where is creation, but also who is the creator in this passage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Karyn, I love your description of this as a creation account. That yes, creation as in the created order is within this, but it's also like God's retelling of God's creation of the world. And God is like kind of like a sassy mother in this. Like God is totally depicting God's self as a mother in this, right? The sea bursting forth from the womb, and then using the clouds as swaddling bands for the world, and like is totally like sarcastic and like kind of like clapping back to Job. So I love that, and I love that picture. I think creation too is in it's sort of like shrouded in mystery, kind of this image of the whirlwind as like this world of creation that exists that is so far beyond what we as humans could ever conceive or begin to wrap our heads around. That even now, when we read this in the year 2024, where like science is so advanced, like still creation is just a whirlwind, and like we can see but a hem of God's robe that is all of creation. So I love that like Job is just caught in the swirl of everything. That Job is a part of creation here, and that the God is embodying God's self through creation, through the whirlwind, and also that creation is so much more than what humans are, what humans can possibly perceive.
And Avery, to your point, I think there's almost a secondary question here of not just where is creation, but when is creation. That part of what God is saying in the clap back to Job is this was here so far before you, and sort of by God is also kind of inferring we'll be here long after you. That this is so much more permanent, that creation is so much more, um, so much, in our work, I think we so often think about the fragility of creation, but God is kind of saying to Job, creation is so much more durable and lasting than you are, puny human. And your understanding of it is so finite and limited and so based off of the limited scope of the few number of years that you get. Part of what's so interesting about this is um the sarcasm of God, of just like, please tell me if you have these answers, because I'd love to hear it. Like, I mean, please let me know where, I mean, if you were around for any of this, please, like, clue me in. It's like one of my favorite images of God. Like, I can kind of get behind sarcastic God.
Oh yeah.
but it's super helpful to um put Job, and by extension humanity, because this is really where Job is here. Um Job is throughout this book, in some ways Job is the stand-in for humanity, asking these big questions of the creator of why do bad things happen to good people? How am I supposed to respond when things don't go as they should? And God's response to all of that is, you are this piece of the creation, and you're a finite piece. Um, and that should, chasten you a little bit. It should humble you a little bit. It should give you perspective. Um, in ways that Job at this point in the narrative desperately needs, and that humanity kind of continually needs, as we recognize our part in the creation.
Yeah, it feels like there's this correction of the Genesis correction narrative around creation, because I think it's in Genesis you have this creation story or stories that all these things are created, and it all leads up to the creation of humans, as if
Hmm.
like we're the star, the like the everything, nothing else needed to be created once we arrived. And so there's this like centering that can often happen, and also in our even in our interpretation of like dominion and other things, where we often make ourselves the sun.
Mm.
And what I appreciate about this text, because I do like the same like sarcasm or kind of sass that y'all are talking about, I almost picture God as like a thug saying these words to someone like, and so for me, there is like major attitude in the scripture as I read it, but it is this sense of like God putting things back into perspective of like, you are just a small piece of a very large puzzle. And it makes me emotional to think about it, because there is such a grand creation. And when you think about, and as God talks about the dimensions, the footing set, the cornerstone, and all these things, and I think about how, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure more, but like there's things that we still are just now discovering as
Mm.
humans in this time frame. Like it's really, and to just know like there are just parts of the ocean that we have never seen,
Mm.
um and parts of the larger universe that we just don't know. And so it's really just beautiful to see how much even this word still rings true.
Mm.
such a long time afterwards, because still to this day there's so many mysteries that are beyond our understanding of creation. And I think it's important for us to remember that we are just but a blimp in
Mm.
time, and just a very small part of the larger creation, as opposed to centering ourselves as we often do in society.
Mm. And I think it's so interesting that God could have gone a lot of different directions in terms of being able to put Job into perspective. I mean, he could have talked about the ancientness of the forests. He could have talked about the ancientness of mountains. Um, but he chose, or God chose the ocean. God chose the seas. God chose the power of the seas. And to your point, which um we know something about now, right? Like we know a little bit about, but part of what we know is that it's the majority of the world is ocean. Um, Part of what we know is its power, and then, but then there's also, the scientific um, assertion that we know more about outer space than we know about what's going on in the depths of the ocean. And so as baffling as the ocean would have been for as baffling as the ocean is for us, it would have been infinitely more for Job. And I think we often talk about that feeling of smallness that we have with if we're like standing on the shore and we're looking out the ocean. Um, and we usually, when we're referring to that small feeling, we're actually saying that smallness as a positive. And here I feel like God is actually saying that same thing, that smallness um is a positive. That being a tiny speck in something larger and bigger, it's putting Job in his place, but it's humbling, not humiliating. It's bringing him to the as we often talk about, the right relationship, the proper um relationship to creation. um so it's interesting that God could have gone a lot of different directions, right? But God goes to the ocean. Let's go to the let's go to the thing that's gonna really um show you where you are in the midst of this.
Yeah, Derek, there's a photo that I saw recently that's just a photo from space of the Pacific Ocean.
Mm.
Um, and I was reading along with that photo that there's a point in the Pacific Ocean where if you draw a direct line through the middle of Earth to the other side, it hits the Pacific Ocean.
Hmm.
That's how big the Pacific Ocean is, right? Like it's huge. I mean, it's so ocean is 70% of Earth's surface. And
Mhm.
of course, like by volume, that's so much water, right? Because it's so deep. And I think for a lot of history and even now, there's been an impulse to say, because we can't see that thing, there's probably no life in it.
Mhm.
We can't see it, so it's probably empty. We can, we'll fish and we'll get fish out of there, and that's fine, but there's probably no life. But what God is saying here, and the wisdom of the writer of Job, is that no, like you are but a small piece, and what you see really does not matter.
Mm.
There is life in the depth, the Leviathan, and all of the sea creatures. We don't even know what they are, so we're going to call them the Leviathan. But
Mhm.
we know that they are immense, amazing creatures down there. And the wisdom of Job, and this is wisdom literature, is now being borne out through scientific research and expeditions that are diving down to the depths and finding things. And even with those mysteries being revealed, there's so much more to find out, right?
Mm.
With every creature that we find, um, that there's four more that are probably sustaining that creature's life that we don't know about. So, creation here, it's about the mystery and it's about the questions.
Mm,
This almost everything that God says in these passages is a question. Every sentence, almost every sentence is phrased as a question. And of course, it goes beyond verse 11. The lectionary text for today is just to verse 11. But there's something like 45 more verses of God's questioning beyond that. Right? And so creation is about the mystery. It's Job, Job is wisdom literature, and I think one of the ways that Job is pushing back against the wisdom literature, at least of Proverbs, is getting away from this kind of mechanical orthodoxy of you do something good, you get something good. All of these proverbs that
mm,
both exist in the biblical text, but also in our social world, toward the mystery, that wisdom is actually found in the mystery. Wisdom is found not in our logic, our ability to understand and to wrap our heads around what's going on, but just to embrace the whirlwind
mm.
and to look to nature, to look to the wisdom of nature.
Yeah. So let's I think we've started to hint at this a little bit. So where's the text calling us to interact with nature?
I'll just pop back in here and say, kind of related to the thread of thinking on questions, God is a curious God.
Mm.
Right? Curious people ask questions. Non-curious people make statements. I frame that as a statement, which tells you the kind of person that I am. But I think it's in some ways an invitation to ask these questions
Mm,
of nature. Some of them are, um, there's different ways of knowing that are being expressed here.
mhm,
Some are kind of religious, metaphysical ways of knowing, but some are actually just like legitimate, the interworkings of creation, especially later on. Like the beginning of chapter 39. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer? An invitation to observe these things.
mhm,
The implication of God asking that question is like, no, you're too busy with your human life
mm,
and all of the drama of human life that is, only playing out on the stage of creation to really stop and look at the miracle of the mountain lion giving birth. Look at the miracle of the ostrich, of the stars, of the drama of the mystery of creation unfolding around you. So I'm feeling a real invitation just to be curious
mm,
about creation as a way of understanding God a little bit more.
mm,
Yes, to what Avery said, I would also say I see this as also an invitation to make sure that our perspectives are right.
mm,
And part of that being one, the rhetorical questions, as Avery said, the questions will shift a bit of like, do you know when certain things are happening? But the beginning of the questions are, or not, well, where were you? But also like, who marked off its dimensions? Who stretched a measuring line across it? Um, there are these questions that are rhetorical because we know the answer of the who that did these things. And
mhm,
I think it's an invitation to look at God, but also to look at the full scale of God's creation to the point that we can frankly understand, knowing that it's beyond that. But I think part of that invitation is to put ourselves rightfully within the right scale of where we are in creation in this story from the beginning, and really just being able to have the humility to acknowledge the creator, but also to put ourselves in the right perspective and narrative and scale of creation.
mm. Yeah, that's so good. And I think about this. Where is this in context? Um, Job has had this horrible loss of family, this horrible loss of wealth, and in the midst of these horrible things, has, had his wife tell him to curse God and die, and then has had his friends come and lecture him, um, kind of repeatedly. And there is this almost like God is piling on a little bit, but it's not. It's that God's part in this is actually the shift in perspective. God's part in this is actually like okay, your friends have been trying to comfort you, quote unquote, and they've been doing a really poor job. But what I need you to understand is that the who's communicating with you right now has set up the entirety of the world. Um, and somewhere in the context of this, you lost the thread that you're a part of this creation. And I think where God is bringing Job back to is um not just to see yourself in perspective to the creation, but like see yourself in the midst of it. See yourself as a part of it. See yourself as a part of an unfolding thing where, later we see God talking about lions chasing their prey and ravens, crying for food. And there's this whole drama going on, and you're a part of it. You're not excluded from it. You're a part of it. You're not the central part of it, but you are a part of it. And think of yourself now as a part of this larger mystery, this larger narrative that I've created. And there will be pieces to your struggle that you can't answer. And there will be pieces to your journey that you won't see the end of. And there will be pieces that are just always going to confound you and fill you with grief. But know that you're part of creation's story. Um, the good, the bad, the ugly. You're part of creation's story. And there's not like, I mean, there's kind of a resolution that, and honestly, like the end of Job kind of feels tacked on. Um, but like in some ways there's no resolution. In some ways there's just these ongoing questions of how do we fit in this story, and how do we make peace with being a part of this story. So then where is there, as we hear God talk to Job, and particularly talk to Job in the context of in this particular slice of it, um, Job, here's you. Job, here's the ocean. Get some perspective. Um, where is there a call to action for the church?
Yeah. Well, let me mention something that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is probably pretty important, which is that June is Ocean Month.
Mm.
And here at Creation Justice Ministries, that's important to us. We center the ocean as a place that we care for and that we love and that we can learn a lot from God about. We try and remember that the ocean, as much as the land, is an extension of God's creation, and that as humans, we're healers of that place. And so I think there's a call to action for the church in just looking at the ocean to start out, especially for those who are inland, who don't have the gift of a short drive or a short walk to the ocean, of remembering that you too are intimately connected to the ocean, that every other breath you take is made possible because of creatures in the ocean. 50% of the world's oxygen comes from photosynthesizing plankton in the ocean. Or in the Amazon rainforest, it's coming from the ocean. And it's so beautiful and interesting to me that this week's lectionary passages happen to be in the middle of Ocean Month, and by the wisdom of the lectionary writers, are all related to the ocean and the sea. Of course, we've been talking about Job, but the other ones, Psalm 107, and then the passage in Mark 4, 35 through 41, where Jesus is calming the waters. The lectionary writers have really handed the church a wonderful opportunity to talk about the ocean in the midst of Ocean Month. So I'd say the first call to the church is to look to the sea, and to talk about how we're connected to the ocean and how we can understand God through the ocean.
I agree with Avery, and I think part of thinking of this as a bit of a creation retelling, as a part of it, I think it's important to also think about what is the mandate that we have when it comes to our responsibility to the rest of creation. And I think especially the highlighting by God in this text of the mysteries, this is an invitation for us to take care of creation. And often it's so much of the stuff that we can see. But here's an opportunity for us to also remember the stuff that we can't see. And no better place than the ocean, whether you are inland, on a coast, I don't know, or even at a lighthouse in the middle of the ocean. Like there is still mysteries that we have when it comes to the ocean. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to think about how do we care for creation, both known and unknown to us.
Mm.
And so part of how I think we can take care of them, or at least one of the ways that we are celebrating and taking care of the mysteries of God, is actually recognizing one of the places that has been a mystery to us until more recent years, which is the Blake Plateau. And so the Blake Plateau is a recently discovered area where for a long time we thought the largest deep sea coral were in places like Australia. And it turns out it's actually in the US, or right off the coast of the US, between 80 to 200 miles off the coast of the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida is the Blake Plateau. And so for this Ocean Month, we invite everyone to take a part in advocating for this place. We are hoping to get protections for the Blake Plateau, particularly right now. We're seeking a monument designation by the Biden administration. We also want support to come from our congressional leaders as well, particularly those that are in Georgia, to then be able to show support for this, to be able to let President Biden know that we want to see a designation for this area, because as I said, until recently, we didn't even know that it existed. And there's still so much mystery related to it, but there's so much that's been revealed thanks to God's grace about what happens. And we know that what happens beyond the depths of what we can see, what we now know because of science, is that these areas are actually quite important to the stuff that we can see, or the things that we can't see, but we very much feel and need, such as our oxygen. But when it comes to the health of our ecosystems, our food security, our air, and everything else, areas like this, these places that are the deep mysteries that we're still discovering, they are actually quite important. As Avery said earlier, for a long time, there was this misconception as if because we can't see it, there must not be anything there, but it's actually quite expansive. The biodiversity in the areas that we cannot easily see is quite fascinating. And we're really in a place where, unfortunately, because of how we've been treating the earth, and especially the ocean, we're in a place where, unfortunately, there's probably species that we could be losing before we even know they existed. And so this is an invitation, this Ocean Month, and frankly, all year round, to be able to really take care of the mysteries of creation. And this was one of the mysteries that's recently been revealed to us as humans. But nevertheless, it's still a part of the creation of God. And so not to keep rambling, but all that to say is that we invite people to go to creationjusticeministries.org/Blake Plateau, to go to our webpage and to take action, to be able to send emails or even to call if you want it to your congressional leaders, but also informing the Biden administration that we want to see this area protected. God's creation is sacred, and so therefore we need to treat it as such.
Mm. I love that, Karyn. And the images that are coming in from Blake Plateau, which we've only recently gotten some images and video just from the last 5 years, are remarkable and so different from life that we see every day. Just like another reminder of the mystery of God. It's so interesting to talk about Blake Plateau in context of this passage too. In verse 4, God says, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" And then later on what were its bases sunk. And some of these deep sea corals, the base of the deep sea coral is over 1 million years old.
Hmm.
The coral has been growing there for 1 million years. And even some of the coral that is now there is, has been growing for over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. That coral is a lot closer to when God was laying the foundation of the earth than we were. What did we look like 1 million years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago? A lot different from what the humans look like right now. And it's humbling and it's beautiful. And it's crucial that we protect it from threats. Blake Plateau it's a threatened ecosystem for a few reasons. The first is oil and gas development. So far, it has been protected from oil and gas development, but those protections are slated to expire in the next couple of years. And so we have an opportunity here to make sure that those protections don't lapse and that we destroy this ecosystem because of our lust for fossil fuels. It's also at risk from deep sea mining. There are a lot of critical minerals that we need now and that we're going to need even more as we transition to a renewable energy economy, right? Renewable energy economy doesn't mean a non-extractive economy. So we need to make sure that we're protecting places like this from deep sea mining. And then finally, commercial fishing. Overfishing has a real impact, especially with this thing called bycatch, which is different fishing practices that they'll catch whales or dolphins or sea turtles. Sometimes as much as 10 or 20% of the catch is bycatch, marine mammal and another bycatch, and then those creatures just die. So ensuring that there are regulations in place so that commercial fishing, is regulated well and that bycatch is minimized. So just to reiterate again what Karyn said, go to creationjustice.org/Blake Plateau, and we'll have more information there. We'll also have an opportunity for you to take action and to share this information and take action alongside your church.
As I've been learning from both of you and from other places where I've started to do some research on Blake Plateau, one of the things that has really captivated me is that all of the things that we've said in terms of the biodiversity and the coral reefs, like all of that would be enough for us to protect that area. But as I've learned more, realized how important this area is to the Gullah and Geechee people and the Gullah Geechee Nation. And they recognize this community of African and indigenous descent that's largely in South Carolina. And they recognize that this area where the Blake Plateau is located certainly would have been an area that ships had to travel through to go through the Middle Passage to bring enslaved Africans to the colonies. And there's a belief and an understanding within the Gullah Geechee that the blood and bones and bodies of the enslaved who either didn't make it or chose to go overboard instead of living in enslavement, that their bodies fed this coral reef. And again, thinking of ourselves as part of creation, as part of creation's narrative in beautiful ways and in tragic ways, recognizing that the stories of the ways in which we're involved with creation sometimes leave us with unanswered questions or unsettled questions. Um, I just think that's, that area being protected almost as a deep sea memorial, um, that feels incredibly important. That we not repeat the mistakes of the past of letting pieces of life be degraded for the sake of an economy. Um, that feels like an important message that history is trying to help us relearn over and over and over again. And so as we um, think about the ocean and all of our incredibly complex relationships to it, just want to make sure that we think of all of these different complexities, um, and in some ways the scripture invites us to think about all of those different complexities.
Yeah, and Derrick, thank you for mentioning that, the significance, because this is important. As a Black woman, was not of Gullah Geechee descent to my knowledge, but this is important for the diaspora of those who are of African descent, especially those whose family and ancestors came through the Middle Passage to the US, or who were brought through the Middle Passage. And one of the things that I learned recently is that because of how deep it is, the matter, it decomposes. It takes over 1,000 years to do so.
Mm,
So when you say that it's a memorial, it's still an active, those roots are still being fed with the
mm,
matter from those who were enslaved. And so it is still an active, living ecosystem that is a memorial to those who either voluntarily or involuntarily were um, cast aside into the ocean. And so it's something where there is, again, just there's still a contribution that's happening to this ecosystem. And so it should be respected, not only as sacred simply because God created it, but also sacred because of the history that it holds and the significance that comes along with that. And in the same way that we would not disrupt a graveyard, a burial site on land, we also should be respecting that in the ocean. It's not allowed in like the Great Lakes, for example, when there's shipwrecks. And so why should this be any different in the ocean? That instead we actually do treat it as the sacred sites that it is, and being able to hold that and to be able to stand in solidarity with people such as the Gullah Geechee Nation, but also many other Black Americans who have a history that is tied to that particular part of our history around the Middle Passage.
mm. Yeah, that's really well said. I would say just kind of the last thing that I feel like is a call to action for the church is um, part of how we get to the space where we feel compelled to protect the ocean, um, is experiencing it and loving it. And I think that there is a call here in some ways to um, experience the ocean, and experience its power and experience that sense of awe and wonder that comes from being at the shore and recognizing your own smallness. I think we look at the cathedrals that have been built, particularly in this country and in Europe, and they are built to inspire awe, And to some extent they do, but I just don't know that there's anything more awe-inspiring than finding yourself at the ocean, and recognizing the God who set the dimensions of it, and recognizing your part in that God's story, and the ways that that can humble and shape and inform us. All right, Avery, Karyn, thank you so much. Thank you especially for bringing our attention to Blake Plateau. Again, if folks are interested, you can go to creationjustice.org/Blake Plateau and learn more about this amazing ecosystem that is right off of our coast. But thank you for this conversation on Job 38 and the ways in which our sassy mother of a God brings us back to perspective and back to our right relationship with creation.
Yeah. Thank you for having us, Derrick, and happy Ocean Month, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to the Green Lectionary Podcast. This episode was produced by Derrick Weston, and the music was provided by Christian McIver. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and help us spread the word with a good review. Leave us a comment to let us know how you've used the show and how we can make it more useful for your ministry. You can learn more about this and the other programs of Creation Justice Ministries at creationjustice.org.